All right, so welcome everybody. My name is Kayla Klein. I am the Director of Early Learners South Dakota. This is another episode, if you will, in our webinar series. This webinar series came from our business collaborative, which is a partnership between the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation and the Bipartisan Policy Center. Some of our main partners with the Business Collaborative here include Laura Jones with Elevate Rapid City, David Owen with the South Dakota Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And these webinars are essentially a way to get you information about the childcare crisis to across South Dakota, what communities are doing, and really trying to help us all kind of learn from each other and what we can do to better our communities and help the crisis. So with that, we are going to hear from 3 communities who received the Governor's Office of Economic Development Child Care. And in some cases, there was a planning and an implementation grant that was granted to these communities. And in some cases, just the planning grant. So we're going to hear from these communities. What I'm hoping you all can walk away from today is some community solutions, maybe where you can start. Yes, the GOED grants are no longer available. Those funds all came from the ARPA dollars, or the American Rescue Plan Act dollars. And that was the federal relief dollars that came during the COVID pandemic. So those dollars are gone, but what are some maybe ways that communities can still make some innovative strategies moving forward with or without any additional funds? And starting off those conversations, I'm going to switch it over to Laura Jones. Take it away.
Hello, everybody. Laura Jones, Housing and Community Development Manager here at Elevate Rapid City. I am going to share my screen successfully. Look at me go. We were awarded a planning grant and an implementation grant, so I'll kind of go over both of those with you and lessons learned and what we did. Next, okay. So the planning grant was when was that submitted? About a year ago. And then we were awarded in November, and that ran through June for us. So we were awarded a community childcare planning grant to collect data on the Rapid City metro area. We developed a survey that went out via SurveyMonkey to the community. Anybody from the community could take it. And we were particularly looking for unregistered in-home providers and what parents were seeing in terms of the need and their challenges in the workforce. We are also looking for provider data, wanted to know what providers kind of thought of the current situation and what their challenges were and what opportunities existed to help them with their challenges if we were to receive an implementation grant. So we did all this data collection to try to prepare for an implementation grant. We offered a drawing for large gift cards, but I didn't get the responses that we were hoping to. So I don't know if that was just a marketing thing. We can get into that, but there's no need to. And then we also contracted with Porchlight Consulting out of Sioux Falls area. And they conducted a separate employer kind of cost benefit analysis to make the business case for why employers should care about childcare. So through all of that, the main challenges in finding childcare boiled down to availability, cost, and how to find it. We learned that somewhere around 30% of people are paying, what the heck? I'm sorry, everybody. An insane number of people were paying 30% or more of their income on childcare every month, which is about what you're supposed to be paying for housing. And then the wait lists and availability were outrageous as well. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, and we knew we wouldn't be able to address those things with the implementation grant that had to be spent by September 30th. But When we asked the community if childcare was a barrier to employment, 69% of respondents said yes. We had about 700 responses, and 31% said no. And then 75% of respondents said that they have had to make career or job decisions due to the availability and affordability of childcare. So we kind of are able now to put numbers to the anecdotes that we've been hearing about people not entering the workforce or re-entering the workforce after they have a child because they can't find childcare in Rapid City. We also asked if they have left the workforce due to the affordability and availability of childcare, and only 30% said yes. But of those 30%, 77% said they would consider rejoining the workforce if they had an easier time finding and affording childcare. So that's about 130 people out there in Rapid City who would like to rejoin the workforce but can't because of the cost or availability of childcare. When we had Porchlight do the cost benefit analysis, they surveyed employers to see what employers were currently providing in terms of benefits related to childcare. And they focused on schedule flexibility, backup childcare, flexible spending accounts and or stipends to pay for childcare, and on-site
there's a lot to
childcare.
understand there, and I mean, I think
So they found that schedule flexibility would save the average employer in Rapid City $416,000 annually. And it basically costs you nothing to do right away. So that was the key takeaway that we kind of took out of their report. It's something that employers could start doing today, just offer flexibility. Some examples include, letting your parents pick up their children from elementary school and then working from home the last 2 hours of the day, or moving their schedules around so that they can do drop off and pick up. Just really simple shifts in scheduling that ultimately end up saving the employer money in terms of sick days or time away, and increases productivity. It also, we realize, isn't feasible in every case, but for a lot of people, it would be very impactful. On-site childcare costs $500,000 annually, so it's not really feasible for most employers in Rapid City, much less in South Dakota. As we know, most employers in South Dakota are quite small. When we talk to providers, we sent out a provider specific survey via SurveyMonkey, and then I also held roundtables. This is in relation to that survey. We had 25 provider responses, and of them, about half were in-home and half were centers, and they had a maximum capacity of about 1,500 kids among those 25 providers, with an average annual enrollment of about 1,300 and a cumulative wait list of 925. A lot of these providers also responded that they have at least one room closed if they were a center, and that their main challenges were staffing. So even if they were able to expand their operations, they would still struggle with keeping rooms open due to staffing. In the provider roundtables, they were almost always formulaic. It was kind of an open roundtable discussion, and I would just start by saying, so tell me about your challenges, or tell me about your operations. And almost everyone would start out with, staffing is a problem. I cannot attract and retain qualified staff. I can't pay a competitive wage, and I can't pay for benefits, because then I would just be raising rates, and that's not sustainable either. They have trouble maintaining ratios, especially when there are call outs that result in closing rooms and finding substitutes. But then they also would turn around and say that some child ratios can be overwhelming. Dealing with infants is a lot, and 1 to 5 infants is too much for a lot of people. And so they have high burnout rates, which goes back to maintaining trouble retaining qualified staff. A lot of them cited that operational costs have doubled since COVID. They perceived the regulations and regulators to be inconsistent. I can get more into that if there are any specific questions, but like I said, it was a roundtable, unprompted, and they mostly just were concerned about the registration versus non-registered and the benefit of being registered versus not being registered if there's no consequences for not being registered. They have noted an increase in behavior issues and learning challenges since COVID, and they noted concern with continued closures of existing centers. If nothing is done, they're concerned that everybody will just continue to be overwhelmed and there will be no place for kids to go, and it's just a cycle. I should also note that I had 25 providers participate in these roundtables over 4 nights, and they also were kind of split half in-home, half center, and it was a mix of registered or regulated versus non-registered in-home. Some suggestions they came up with, which we recognize that most of these we could not do in the implementation grant performance period because there's such a short amount of time. But if any of you are out there and see any of these that you would like to try to tackle, go ahead and steal them. So a substitute pool managed by a third party, so the school district, for example, would maintain a list of substitutes that they have vetted, including fingerprinting and background checks, and a provider could just call on this pool anytime they need a sub. They're looking for a non-Facebook communication platform. Here in Rapid City, we have that starting, I believe. Insurance pooling, mostly for fringe benefits. The kind of business and commercial insurance is less of a concern than the ability to provide health insurance. Transportation pooling, especially for in-home providers, they struggle with getting school-age kids before and after school, either to or from, especially if they have infants that they have to pack up and haul around. Centralized resources readily available. They'd like to see, forms that they need to fill out ready somewhere. And I'm not a childcare provider. I will add this caveat. So these may exist somewhere. I'm just not aware of it. A training program in partnership with schools. So, senior high schoolers who maybe want to get into childcare, setting up a program to train them with kind of internships. Food truck co-op, so the smaller providers can access bulk food at a lower rate. Business training for in-home providers and state level policy changes, just broad brush. For the implementation grant, we applied for the full amount based on everything that we learned in the planning grant. And the one thing that I could take away that I knew I could get done in 3 months from the provider roundtables was this business bootcamp idea. So I partnered with Kayla Klein Visioneering, SDCEO West, the Women in Business Center at Black Hills State University. And they found some wonderful women, Jonessa Bixel and Susan Dotson, to help develop this bootcamp to provide to in-home providers, either new or existing, to kind of get them to think about their business as a business and to set into play things like financial planning and insurance basics, and just kind of getting things set up and treating yourself as a business person. So we offered 7 of these boot camps throughout the Black Hills in conjunction with the EDOs in each of the cities. In June, there were 5 new providers, which is 60 new spots in the hills. And in some of these towns, that's huge. Like Belle Fourche, there was 1 provider out of Whitewood, 1 new provider out of Whitewood, who Whitewood currently has no providers. So if she were to set up shop, it would be a huge increase in the number of spots available to people in Whitewood. And in August, we had 6 new providers, which could equate to 72 new spots. The topics included things like finding your vision, business planning, business insurance basics, funding, financial planning, branding and marketing, operating your business, family childcare as a profession. And then they were sent home with a binder full of resources that Janessa and Susan so graciously put together. We also had Amanda Standing Bear from Black Hills Community Loan Fund come and give some funding and financial planning presentations. Local EDOs helped out with finding spaces and getting things put on their community calendars. And there was one more person who I'm so sorry, I don't remember her last name, but she would sometimes provide insurance basics. Anita, dang.
Anita Charlson or Carlson, but she was a CPA. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. These were really, I feel like, although we did not have, the 20 attendees per session that I was aiming for, I feel like they were really impactful, especially in the smaller communities. We got a lot of really good feedback about, I learned a lot. This was really great. I've been operating for 20 years and I still learned something today. So Susan and Janessa especially did a really wonderful job. We also offered sub-grants for expansion to existing providers. So we received 16 applications. 3 of them were in-home and 13 of them were centers. And we were able to give out 4 grants with the dollars that we had available. And so if all goes to plan, it would be 182 new spots in Rapid City, with Black Hills Behavior or Impact leading the way with 78 new spots. They actually moved into a new facility and will be able to offer childcare in addition to their existing services related to behavior services. Little Pumpkins Daycare is an in-home provider who is expanding to a group home. So she was doing a lot of renovations to her house to get it up to code. Rural America Initiatives added 8 new early Head Start rooms, and this grant helped them furnish 4 of them. And then YMCA of Rapid City is potentially adding 40 new spots with some security upgrades to the Y House and some security upgrades to their main building as well. I frequently get asked this by the board, how many parents will re-enter the workforce? That's a hard thing to answer, right? But maybe 50, maybe 150, I don't know, maybe 182. Hard to say, but regardless, 182 new spots is huge. Moving forward, the one thing that I heard from providers is this is not a problem that's solved by throwing random funding at it. No amount of grants for things and stuff, especially, will do much to help them. Their biggest challenges are being able to pay their staff competitive wage so that they can keep them. More needs to be done in terms of policy work and collaboration. If you're in a smaller community, this is probably much easier to do. But setting up some sort of co-op or getting creative in how you collaborate as a community to address the childcare issue. And then the trainings that we provided through the boot camps will be available online through SDCEO West soon, if they aren't already, and they'll be free to take, so they'll be available to anybody in the state. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Well, I'm going to look for folks to come off mute who want to ask Laura questions. Laura is going to have to leave about 10 minutes early, so she will not be here later after the final presenter goes. But just as a quick question I've had from a couple of people in private chat is, can we have your slides? Our presenters, are you okay if sending me a PDF of your slides?
Yes.
Okay, Tim
and
shaking his head, or yes.
A lot more than just these slides too. If anybody wants more data or more information or my full report, I'm happy to share whatever. So
perfect. Yes, so if the three of you could send me a PDF version of your slides after this, and then I will send it out to the group. If you did not get an email invite from me directly about this webinar, please private message me or put your email in the chat so I make sure not to miss you, just in case you're not on my regular update list. And I'm seeing some of you on here that are not, so please make sure to send me your email if you would like those slides. The recording of this, however, will be on the Early Learner YouTube page. So one last time, does anyone have any pressing questions for Laura? We can always save questions to the end as well. Okay. Let's see. Let's see, I think the data is shocking yet real. I know a few things hit home that we are also seeing in our schools, especially the behaviors and needs. Thanks for sharing the information. All right, thank you for that comment, Barb. Remember, please make sure to continue to add questions into the chat. I will make sure that they get to the presenters. If you don't want anyone to know you're asking the question, you can private message me too, and I will just ask your question without sharing your name. So with that, we will move on to Tim Reed, and thank you again, Laura, for the presentation.
Okay, I think I have my screen shared here. And
yep, looks good.
Good. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tim Reed. I serve as the CEO of the Brookings Economic Development Corporation, and we were awarded both a planning grant and the execution grant for our project from GOED. I also serve as a state senator, and then I'm working quite closely with Kayla on the statewide child care task force. So we really use the planning grant to develop our child care collaborative. And the goal of the child care collaborative was sharing resources to improve child care capacity and early learning opportunities. And what the collaborative was, 4 different organizations coming together to accomplish the collaborative. Those included our school district, the Boys and Girls Club, the Economic Development Corporation, and then the South Dakota State University. And Dean Ortleb's on the call today, and having his College of Education and Early Learning be part of our collaborative was very helpful. So it's always nice to be able to use the resources of SDSU. I want to back up a little bit. I know we talked quite a bit on the previous presentation of the survey work they did. Well, the BEDC, had actually started that kind of a process all the way back in 2018. COVID kind of slowed it down as we were working through it. But the timing of the funds being available really lined up well for us to continue our project. And so back in 2018, the BEDC had done a workforce survey, and that survey showed that the #1 issue for our employers in town was childcare, and they were having trouble recruiting and retaining staff because of the unavailability of childcare. So the BEDC continued on and did a child care survey, and they did it for the full Brookings County, and it identified that there was quite a large amount of waiting lists and shared consensus from providers that additional care is needed. Also from the parents, they wanted to make sure that it was quality child care that was available. And so we used all of this information as we moved along through this process. After that child care survey, we formed a different group that was the Brookings Early Care and Education Collaborative. And that's where we brought a lot of stakeholders and experts together to try to figure out, what we're going to do to address the needs that we found in both the workforce and the child care survey. That led to doing a supply plan, and the Brookings Early Care and Education Collaborative identified the need for 495 birth to 5-year-old slots in Brookings County. And so we knew what we needed to try to get done from that supply plan. After that, the city had set aside $580,000 in ARPA funds for child care expansion efforts. They knew for workforce and just the concept of having quality child care, that this is a place they wanted to put some of the ARPA funds that they received. They tasked the Brookings Economic Development Corporation to stand up, or at least create as many slots as possible with that funding. The plan that came out of that was to increase childcare slots by 80, and basically we were going to start up a new facility. Well, along that time, the school district, excuse me, the school district decided that in their 2 new schools that they were building, new facilities, both schools were already there, but they were either being extremely remodeled, or most of it was being torn down and adding new buildings. They put early learning classrooms in each of those buildings, and they had, in one of the previous newer elementary schools, they also had an early learning classroom that they could use. And so the school at that time had decided that they were going to go into early learning. And one thing that we've learned through studying childcare is that when schools do go into early learning, it can be at the detriment of other providers for the 4 and 5-year-olds. And we know that that can really upset the balance sheet or the profit and loss sheet when you start pulling those 4 and 5-year-olds out of other childcare facilities. At that point, and this kind of happened at the same time, where then we formed the Brookings Child Care Collaborative. And at that same time, as we were talking through it, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, the Boys and Girls Club decided that they would go into birth to 0 care. The Boys and Girls Club had done 4 and 5-year-old early learning, and they had decided through the collaborative effort that they would transfer that space to do 0 to 2 care instead. And so through this collaborative, the Boys and Girls Club wanting to do 0 to 2 or accepting to do 0 to 2, and then the school district starting up 4 to 5, we decided that through the efforts of both these organizations that we could offer continuous care for up to 360 birth to 5-year-old children. And that continuous care is from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. in the day. And what's happening here is when the young students go to the school district for early learning, the Boys and Girls Club is there at the beginning of the day from like 6 to 8, and then from 4 to 6 to provide, extended childcare. And so the 2 organizations worked very closely together to accomplish this. So the planning grant is what got us to the point of forming the collaborative. So as we looked at the collaborative, what we ended up that we thought we'd be able to accomplish is we were going to have childcare at 4 locations at 3 elementary schools in the Boys and Girls Club. We are going to provide on-site care at those facilities from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And what we thought we could do for capacity is increase our 0 to 3 to 130 learners. There already were 3-year-olds at the Boys and Girls Club. I have a small class of them, but now we expanded that to 0 to 3. And then, so 130 slots there, and we could do 230 4 to 5-year-old learners. And so we really got beyond that 80-some capacity that we thought we could do with the city funds, and I'll explain how we got there. The total project investments for the project then, after the planning grant, as we started working through this, is $8.3 million. Now, $6.5 million of that is the new facilities at the school district, and then also the already established facilities at the Boys and Girls Club. So we didn't have to build any buildings new for this project. All of that was already completed. Then we received in grants, and this includes the GOED grant, almost $1.2 million in grants that came from the GOED. And also we have an organization that's called Vision Brookings, and you've I think many of the larger cities have it. It's where there's private investments in projects that help improve the economy. And so those were 2 real major parts of the grants that were awarded. And then the city, during this process, I went back to them as the BDC and said, this is a much better project. And so they transferred the $580,000 to this project to accomplish the number of slots. So the city, along with a smaller amount of business sponsorships, got us to this total of $8.3 million that was for the phase 1. That phase 1 was basically, one-time funds for equipment and supplies, and then education and staffing. This bought the curriculum that was going to be used in the early learning program. and also helped bring the staff training, get that completed. And then also we did need funds so we could have the first year salary for a director. And then there was construction that needed to be done at the Boys and Girls Club. And so the architecture expenses, the renovations, were two of the items that this funding was being used for. Now, a big thing that I've learned in studying childcare is the sustainability of it. And the city was extremely concerned that this was going to be a sustainable project. And so what we've done to make sure that it's sustainable is that the partners that we talked about that are in this, and especially the Brookings School District and the Boys and Girls Club, was able to use a lot of the resources they already had for the project. For example, you can see the facilities. They put the facilities in for this basically at no charge. It's nice, both the Boys and Girls Club and the school district already had established food programs. I think something else that's really important is both of those organizations were very well trusted in the community. And although that doesn't go directly to the sustainability, it's still something that showed that these groups could accomplish this. When we did do fundraising for this, saying that we had these two organizations was very helpful, especially for like the Vision Brookings funding and for the city funding, just because both organizations were well respected. The operational expenses, they were able to absorb from janitors to, all that kind of overhead, your expenses that you had, both organizations were able to absorb that. And then one thing that's really important were the teachers. We really wanted to make sure that the salary for both the Boys and Girls Club and the school district were at a level that we could retain them. And try to also elevate the quality of the program. Where we're at today in the project is, obviously we've been through the summer, all the school renovations were complete, so the elementary schools have their early learning facilities. During the fall, then we did start up continuous on-site care from 3 to 5-year-olds. In this winter, the club will renovate, so they can do, basically they're already doing 3-year-old care, but they are going to move to 0 to 2. And so there'll be renovations that will be done over the winter. And they hope to start the birth to 2 club care in the spring of 2025, and that'll be up to 130 new slots. And then throughout the summer, we will have the full birth to 5 care from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Started up. So we have to start a little slower on this, and we'll have much more capacity, but we ended up with 60 students enrolled for pre-care, and then we'll move on to that 130 infant care through 2025. We're really kind of full this year in what we're doing. We have 1 class at each of the elementary, and then the Boys and Girls Club later on here in the winter, they will start to accept applications for the birth to 2 care. And those services will start early in 2025. Now we're moving on to phase 2 because we do want to grow this program. There's really 3 things that we have to do to continue on here. And our phase 2 goals, what the current landscape is, and what's our response going to be for that. And so now that we've got the collaborative put together, our goal is to expand to support families in need, especially young and low-income families. This will ensure that more children are ready for school. And that's something that's been really important in this whole project. It's not just about building childcare capacity and providing quality care. The school district is very involved in this because obviously they want their students to be as ready as possible for kindergarten. And so we need to foster that long-term success in learning and development. So our current landscape, now we're going to get into some of the costs and how we want to expand this into some lower income families. And I think we all understand the current landscape that, the high cost of childcare and lack of quality is keeping many families from fully participating in the workforce. And obviously that's the economic issues that Elevate talked about. The costs for providers are very steep, making the overall expenses even higher. So even though we have the sustainability model and we have these partners that are putting some of the overhead and those other items into the collaborative, it's still also very expensive. Now, someone will point out that one of the goals we had early on is that the school district is the first in the state to offer licensed and registered full-day preschool / childcare, because we have that 6 to 6, giving families access to the state childcare assistance. So we needed to get fully licensed at the school district. But despite this, child care assistance only covers a portion of the need, as it supports families earning up to 209%, which is, there's also a sliding scale to that. And then leaving an estimated gap, we figure there's about 30% of our families that will still struggle to afford care. And my presentation is correct there, but there's families that, are over that 209% that still can't afford childcare. And so what we're working on is that we're also able to do a sliding scale scholarship for them. So what we're looking at doing is having a scholarship investment model. We're looking to go to some of the more philanthropic families and foundations in the area here. We're also hoping to go to the businesses. Some of those businesses will, maybe want slots, and that's something that we'll work on. But we also know that a few of them also just want to make sure that besides having childcare slots for their workers, they also understand the need for increased childcare quality. And so we will be working with those local businesses to engage in supporting this initiative. We'll also be looking for some subsidies that will help us, whether if it's more through grants and such, that we're going to be looking for that to make sure that we can reach all the lower income families. So you see our project has gotten started. We're starting to start slow, but I think that the investment that came from the GOED grant really helped spur other investment. And from the city, the city investment was already there, but I'm sure that helped to get in the GOED investment. And then having both of those investments already, plus having the respective parties in the process, really helped with getting Vision Brookings to also donate to this or invest in this project. And so all our initial funds that we needed, all our startup funds, have been paid for. And now we're really trying to figure out the best way of providing scholarships so we can reach more families. So I'll stand by for any questions. I guess I'll also share, we have an impact report that I will put the link in here, and then I'll also provide these in the messages. I'll also provide a PDF of my slides.
Looks like we have Kevin Nelson that came off mute.
Thank you, Kayla. Senator, that about is as comprehensive and wonderful as I've ever seen. That is really, really wonderful. As the president of the South Dakota Association for the Education of Young Children, and also the co-chair of Early Learner South Dakota Early Learning Communities, I think what we have seen is that the Brookingses and the Watertowns and now Aberdeen, Rapid City, obviously the pioneer in all of this, are doing some really, really great things. But when you go across the border and you go into other states, as we have had that opportunity, a lot of what we're trying to do with duct tape and putting together, as you have done, are just naturally done. And so on. I guess, your two things, or your question about sustainability, I love that. But what happens in the communities that are not part of this and are out there? You can go 10 miles east of you, or 5 miles, I should say, to Volga, and that 20 miles to Arlington, and so on. What are they doing? And are those children being left behind? I know we had primary elections. We have a general election coming up. Do we see any change whatsoever on a state level that starts to look at this and look at early childhood the way that we would want them to? The hard research that indicates that early intervention will have a big impact. Barb had just said a little while ago in Custer what they saw. I was an elementary principal. What we see, what are the chances of us this starting and moving so that every community can get a GOED grant type of opportunity?
So we formed a group, and this is a little bit more on the state side than, of course, this specific project, but there is a group of legislators led by Taylor Rayfeld that's starting to look at how do we take a look at, really early literacy, I think is what we're talking about here. The concept of getting these kids when they're at school or, coming up to kindergarten, that they're at least a little bit at the same starting point, is really a lot of the conversations that we're having around that. So is there anything short term that's going to happen within the next year? I don't see too much happening, but the conversation is starting, and we're trying to figure out how to complete that conversation or kind of get it moving through, identifying legislators that will be helpful for the project, and then figuring out how we communicate with those legislators that have had an adverse reaction, I'll say, to early learning. So we are taking a look at that. In the short term, what I'd like to help with, and this is something that'll be more on me, is right now the amount that's being paid for those, for childcare assistance is not enough to truly sustain our workforce, within childcare.
Right.
And so we have to figure out a way of increasing that. That's something that I'm going to try to attack this year. So at least those families that are using, or have more opportunity to, or at least those that are using the childcare assistance isn't causing those businesses so much strain. Yet they're not able to hire quality and retain those quality teachers. So that's kind of where we're at right now with what we need to do. But I don't disagree that this took a school system that's in, the project that I was talking about, a school system that made very conscious effort to stand up an early learning program. And that's not easy for all the schools. And then it also took a very well-respected and really well-funded Boys and Girls Club, to step in and help with this whole project. So it took the partnership, not having them, kind of trying to vie for their individual place. Instead, they partnered together just to make sure, as the two directors, our superintendent and director, say, just for the kiddos is the comment that they use all the time. So I totally agree on the smaller communities. It's going to be tougher for them to do, but I think partnerships are really, collaboratives and such is really an important way to go forward, no matter the size of your community.
Well, Tim, and I'm just going to add an editorial, and then I want to continue, or maybe not in editorial, but just some observation. Working in the communities that have indeed shown interest in being early learning communities, the people that when we started this, we were concerned about how they would react, which is primarily city government, maybe the business community, and so on. Again, everybody seems to understand the childcare issue because of employment per se. But what we have really been encouraged by is the number of people that when you start to explain brain research and you explain how important early childhood is, they immediately come on board. I'm working with Hartford, for example. Immediately the mayor, everybody said, sign us up. This is incredibly important for us. We should have been doing this long ago. So I think there's more out there that are probably would come in line if this movement continues and we can continue to do the things we need to do.
Yeah, totally agree. Our, to get $580,000 from the city, that was the full council, and I think throughout the full, and especially the mayor leading the effort, how important it was to get kids prepared for kindergarten. Right. That was really critical for them. So I agree with what you're saying. We have to continue with that message.
We still run into just a little bit of the, moms need to be at home taking care of their kids, which again doesn't answer the labor shortage issue, but that seems to go away with some of that, with some of those folks making that argument. But I think, again, we've made huge inroads in that area. So I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Does anyone else have another question? Carly, it looks like you came off mute. Maybe, sorry, Carly, did you come off mute? Okay. If not, I will move on unless there's any other questions. All right, and if there's not, I do have a few questions of my own that I'll be asking at the end to the participants as well. So thank you so much, Senator Reed, for sharing. I appreciate it, and some great comments in the chat as well. So Sarah, we'll move on to you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I am the director for Cottington County Community Services in Watertown. And so we received just the planning grant, which I say just $50,000 is no small amount, but it's kind of a drop in the bucket for what's needed for childcare. For our community it was what we needed to just kind of launch the efforts forward though. So again, I'm with Cottington County Community Services. The Cottington Connects is the work that we've done as a collaborative organization here in Watertown, bringing people together. Our partners were Lake Area Tech, Mother of God Monastery, and then the Watertown Development Company. And this work really started 3 years ago with our social services group that formed Cottington Connects, identified childcare as a primary concern in our community. It was really an area of focus. And so the Child and Family Resource Network from SDSU, actually, one of those Brookings organizations, really came alongside us and helped us move this effort forward. So we created a childcare action team to identify the solutions. I hope Kayla's smiling because one of the things that came out of this is that we partnered with KVG Consulting, and they helped us create this slide deck. And so I've adjusted, but we appreciate all of that work that they put into it. So when we started with our community work, one of the very first things that we did with the support of the Child and Family Resource Network was do a parent survey. And so we heard all of the things that we knew, but then we had data to go behind it. Like so many other communities, that they didn't have enough childcare, that childcare was too expensive, that we have a high percentage of people in our community that rely on childcare. I have this whole report. We have our final full report. I'd be happy to share with everybody if wanted. So all of that led up to then when this funding opportunity was announced, we were able to pretty quickly pull together what we knew would be the vision for our community. And we presented it in 3 phases. So things changed. So I'm gonna kind of take you all with me through the journey because it's been a journey and a roller coaster throughout the last 9 months. But our plan was that we would expand. Lake Area Tech had an Educare childcare facility. They had purchased a school building from the school district and wanted to expand to the other half of that school building, which had been used for other purposes. And so that was our plan, that we were really going to focus on the Educare expansion. And then as we grew and had increased capacity, that we would the Mother of God Monastery had a building that they had identified that down the road they wanted to make into a childcare facility. And then we were looking at some other creative options. We knew a lot of our childcare needs were people that had housing security issues as well. And so we wanted to be creative in that. So that was our initial plan. That is not how it worked. But because what happened is our largest childcare facility then at the same time that we were just working to move this forward and had just contracted with Kayla, informed some of our coalition members that they were planning to close. They have 125 licensed slots and they needed to move that facility out of their church. And so they approached the monastery agreed to take up that initiative. For those of you that aren't familiar with Watertown, the Mother of God Monastery owns a big chunk of land on the south side of the town, and they have decided that they want to leave a legacy for our community with that land. And so they've done a lot of different things, but one of the things they knew they had is that it was a building that was a former assisted living, but they had built a new assisted living. So it was essentially sitting unused, but had great bones, great structure. And so they had the capacity. We're planning 2-3 years that they would make that into a childcare facility. Once Family Worship Center approached them and informed that they needed to close, the monastery stepped up and fully invested. I can't say enough about all of the time and effort and energy that they put into making it, to really putting that vision in, the investment in, and working with consultants to figure out how to make that work. So we also had some other providers that was just smaller in-home providers that were closing at the same time for all of the reasons that have been covered and that everybody on this call knows. Childcare is such a huge challenge for every community, and it's really hard to retain providers. So, so we switched our plan. And we decided to make the monastery our #1 priority, because if we lost those 125 licensed spots, that meant that we had 80 center-based spots in our community, and it would just be the crisis that we've seen happen in other communities that have had centers closed. So what we decided to do was that we would transition Little Blessings to a new site on Harmony Hill, and that would prevent that closure, and also added 100 extra slots because of the size of the building that they had and the consultants that they worked with. They knew that they could increase from 125 to 225 slots there. We also wanted to support the Lake Area Tech expansion. They had currently have 45 slots, and it would add 80 new slots through their expansion. Sorry, I misspoke. They have 55. They would add 80 new slots, plus they added 45 slots for before and after school. So it's, again, a lot of similar things that have been talked about in the other communities. We knew that our data showed we had a huge shortage. I thought I had a slide in here that had it, and I apologize, but we had a huge shortage of childcare slots. We knew we needed about 600 0 to 6 slots and a huge number of after-school slots. The Boys and Girls Club had previously offered some before and after school program at the schools, but they decided to no longer have that programming in that way, and that they would focus on just what they could provide in their building. And so that changed some of that dynamic, and again, created some other needs in our community. The other thing that we knew we needed to address was the in-home providers. And so I'm super fascinated about what they're doing in Rapid City, and hope that we can have more conversations. But what we decided to do was, because other efforts hadn't worked to increase in-home providers, we didn't want it to come from a government organization, and we really wanted to support more of a grassroots effort with our in-home providers recruiting each other and going out to each other. And so we worked with a registered provider to create this group called Watertown Child Care Providers Matter, and to reach out to other in-home providers with the ultimate goal of increasing registered slots, but not requiring them to be registered to be part of it. They do have to have agree to some safety standards and some basic bare minimum standards, but we also knew that in South Dakota and in Watertown, that if we required really heavy regulation, that we were going to turn people off, and the goal is to get as many people to the table as we can, with the ultimate goal down the road of increasing the slots. The other opportunity that came up in Watertown is Roosevelt Elementary. At the end of the school year, last school year, our school district restructured their elementary schools, and which resulted in them closing Roosevelt Elementary here in Watertown. That leaves a building that is available for use. Now, there are some renovations needed for the building. The reason that they chose that building to close is that it's the most recent, and like, it will need the boiler system, the roof replaced, and some of those types of things. It also doesn't have a fire suppression system. So there are some pieces that need to be invested in that. What happened is we had some pretty influential business leaders in our community step up and really have a passion for making Roosevelt into a childcare facility. So that is one that's down the road, and that we're working on it, because as everybody knows, opening a childcare facility isn't as simple as just having a building available. There's a lot more that goes into it. And so we're working on some of those pieces. So those are the solutions that we've identified and come up with. Some of the challenges that we have faced then here in Watertown are the funding. So we came up with the solutions, and then we're able to put the dollars to what the needs are. The monastery needed 2.4 million in order to do the renovations for that building, to transition it from the assisted living that it was into a childcare facility, and all of the supportive pieces that are needed for that. The Lake Area Tech's Educare Center needed around 500,000, 120 to 200,000 of that is for the fire suppression system. That number has changed, as you can expect. And then Roosevelt, we're still trying to kind of sort out the numbers on those kinds of things. And the investment in the childcare providers, the in-home providers, is lower, but we definitely want to have some incentive for that group too. And so there's some financial commitment for that as well. Another one of our challenges here is our regulatory pieces. Our fire department required some different fire suppression requirements than state licensing did. And so we had to just face the fact and face the reality that even though state licensing didn't require the Educare Center, the Lake Erie Tech's Educare Center, to have a fire suppression system, our local fire department was required or is requiring it. And so that has, it's just a reality that we have to work through and work with and figure out. Again, as many others have said, our in-home providers are really isolated and disconnected. And there's also this independence piece of it. One of the things that we have worked really hard and are continuing to work on is recognizing that they are business owners and that they are professionals, and really tapping into that, similar to what was said about the Rapid City initiative. We also have really had to work to get our community to understand the level of this crisis. I think I have, from the start of this work, it has been with the inherent knowledge that our community cares and that Watertown takes care of itself. And so we've said that all along. That being said, what we underestimated was the lack of community understanding of the impact of this issue. And so when we decided to transition our initiative and really focus on making the monastery the priority and transitioning that, we didn't want to create a crisis in the community. And in our effort to not make a crisis in the community, we really did create a crisis in the community. And so we had to go back and really reframe that and let our community know what would happen if they didn't step up to help with this initiative. And because we framed it as Little Blessings wants to transition to the monastery, and here's what we need, and this is what's going to happen, and it's all going to be a smooth transition. And not getting the community to fully understand that in order for that transition to happen, that there had to be some financial investment from our community. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. One of our other challenges from my perspective right now is that we have really only been able to focus on capacity. We know that we want to increase quality, we want to increase care and a whole lot of other things. But because we were so short on just the slots, that we haven't been able to focus on some of those other pieces that once we move these forward, we will be able to focus on the quality and the kind of care the kids are getting. But right now it's just been on capacity for the last 9 months. So what have our successes been then? The great news is, and this is what has been such a roller coaster, probably the start of August, we had not received any of the commitment that we needed to for the monastery to move that forward. And so there was a small group of us that were like, here's the reality is we're going to have to tell our community that Little Blessings is closing. There will be no transition, because without any funding, there won't be a transition. And within 3 weeks, we had the $500,000 commitment between the city and the county. So they really just took that, stepped it up, and came forward to make that commitment. That initial $500,000 from the city and the county spurred further investment. It allowed the monastery to apply for some grants that they had been looking at, but without any local commitment, they weren't able to. And so now here we are in the middle of September, and we're $500,000 away from the $2.4 million needed. And so a lot happened in a very short amount of time, and that our community has really stepped up and is working. The monastery is having some other conversations, and they're really optimistic that they can continue to close that gap and have all of what they need. The good news is if everything continues to move in the way that it needs, renovations will start here within the next few weeks. And we'll be able to transition that facility then with the extra 100 slots, hopefully early 2025. Another success was that, as I mentioned, Lake Erie Tech opened the after-school program in the building. Their their school that they're in is Garfield. So Educare is at the Garfield building, the Garfield school building. They were able to open that after school program to provide care for 40 kids. They're primarily focused on kindergartners and kindergartners with siblings. But again, it met a need that the Boys and Girls Club and other opportunities aren't able to fill here. They've also decided that they're just going to be invest in their fire suppression system. And so they are working on installing that fire suppression system and hopefully moving forward with that piece of it. Our Watertown Child Care Providers Matter group for in-home providers has been meeting regularly on a monthly basis, still working on getting a larger investment. One of the pieces that we knew is we have 9 registered in-home providers in Watertown. However, according to the tax return or tax data documentation, 99 individuals in our community have said that they receive income from childcare. So we have potentially 90 in-home providers that we have no way of knowing who they are and where they are, other than word of mouth. And so that's been part of that piece that we've been really working to make contact and get a better comprehensive list of who our in-home providers are in Watertown. Obviously, our city doesn't require any licensing. They're supposed to be registered as an in-home business, but clearly not enforced. And so that's been some of the pieces we're working on. We've partnered with our Chamber of Commerce that they're holding an event for in-home providers here in October. And again, hoping to engage current providers as well as attract potentially new in-home providers. With that, also, our community has started that process of becoming an early learner community. And that's where I'm really hopeful that we can start switching from just capacity to quality and having those conversations with our community. We've had multiple community presentations and I would say they've had good attendance. For a community our size, I think people are stepping into this need and coming forward with recognizing what we need to do. And the KVG Consulting has been a great support, and that's really what our planning grant went to largely, was the consulting and having somebody with the knowledge and capacity to help our community address this and really move things forward has been huge for us. Some of the things that we've learned, I maybe talked about this a little bit throughout, but we learned how complex childcare is. Truly, until Rachel and her crew from the Child and Family Resource Network stepped in, nobody really had any idea how complicated it was. We knew that it was an issue, we knew it was a problem, but there has been a lot learned in the last year or two regarding childcare and the complexity of the issue. We have learned how hard it is to educate the community. We don't want to instill fear in our community, but then how do you balance that with really having the community understand the level of need and the level of concern that's here in the community? Our radio station, we have a local radio station, and they've been great. I think he told me I can't even remember. He's done, since we started talking about this a year ago, he's done like 40 news reports on childcare. And so just to continue, they say that if you hear, somebody needs to hear something 15 times, and I am convinced now about childcare, somebody needs to hear something 50 times in order to actually start understanding the reality of the needs of it. And so we just keep pounding the pavement and talking the talk and working to get more people together to have this same conversation. One of the other challenges that we realized after we started going to businesses for the funding piece is some of our businesses have been bought out on a national level. And so businesses that used to be locally owned, some of our larger companies that were locally owned are no longer locally owned. And that's made it harder for them to invest in childcare because they see this issue differently. And so we're having to adjust some of the way we're asking for things and the approaches that we're taking with those businesses. We also have learned to be very specific in what we're asking for and how we're asking. One example of this, which was not a difficult ask at all, but our community foundation is fantastic. Watertown has a fantastic community foundation. And when we were looking at wanting to step up and get donations, we went to the community foundation and they immediately agreed to be the location where donations come in, that they would help receive and disperse the donations that we need for childcare. So things like that have been wonderful. It was one of those like, maybe a little bit refreshing for them for us to not come to them for finances right away, but for really the capacity that they are able to help us in, which is more of the bookkeeping piece of it and that really important tracking piece of it. Data matters. I think one of the things that really changed some of the pieces for our community is when we were able to pull out the data that we had received from Kayla, and we had another consultant we were working with through some of our collective impact work, and identified that we are short 600 registered slots for kids in our community. That's a very real number for a community our size. Also the fact that Watertown has one of the highest percentages in the state of the working parents, both all available parents working, is like 86% of parents in Watertown are working. So we know we need parents to work. We know we're short of workforce. And so having that data, being able to point to those numbers was really important and really helped change that dialogue in the community. Money is an essential piece, but without the planning that comes with it and being able to have that business plan and the business models and all of that, we needed to have the plan, and then the money is able to support that plan. And finally, it's really a marathon, not a sprint. We've been sprinting for a while here, but recognizing that this is going to take us years to get to where we need. And there's a lot of work that's still yet to be done with that. So. And yeah, so finally, this was a great slide from Kayla, that coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, working together is success. And I think that really highlights where we are with our community too, that we're just going to continue working together and keeping this effort going.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah. Does anyone have any questions for Sarah? So I'm not seeing anyone come off mute, and remember, I'm looking at everyone's mute button. And if you simply come off mute when you have a question or put it in the chat, you sure can. Just a question I want to ask, and this is for any Sarah, Laura, or Tim. So some communities are probably hearing some of this information and then they're thinking, oh my gosh, where do we even start with this? Or, we didn't get this GOED grant, so is this even a possibility for us to start? And what would be one or two recommendations you would give to communities who want to start down a path of finding solutions for their community that maybe don't have access to any additional funds? Do you have any advice for them? And any of you can take it. Tim?
I think it's really important to understand where your community is at, including your business community. And I think we were lucky to already have done a lot of that work. So I think it's really important, especially as we started talking about how do you convince your community, you've got to have the data, you have to do the work. And so we already had the business community with us because of the surveys we had done, the data that we had reported back out to them. So we had identified that, we really truly had a childcare capacity issue.
Sarah, it looks like you had come off mute as well.
I was just going to say, getting the right players together is really huge. Our coalition that we had brought together initially, it had a lot of important people, but once we were able to bring some of those key movers and shakers to the table, that was when we really started moving things forward with the monastery and the city and some of those other pieces. So I think that's just keep working to get those players to the table.
You mentioned a really interesting point. You mentioned the right players. If someone is looking at starting conversations, who are the people they should be reaching out to?
Well, so I was waiting to see if anybody else jumps on and has any magic answers, because I feel like you need to have a magic wand to figure it out in every community, because it's going to be different in different communities. For us, our mayor has been a huge advocate for for those pieces. And so having him, because of his political clout, that was really important. The monastery, where they were able to have a building, Lake Area Tech, because of the influence they have both with their education piece as well as with an actual facility. They were important players. I think some of those, obviously, economic development needs to be part of the solution and part of the work. But I think it's really just one, who has a passion for it, and two, who has influence for it in your community, and then there's some capacity issues too, who has the ability to kind of change the level of where it's at.
Tim and Laura, do you have anything to add to that? Laura?
I was just gonna say, yeah, find out who cares and who has the capacity. And they may not be the same people, but yeah. Sarah nailed it.
I was gonna say Sarah nailed it.
Well, perfect. And it looks like Jess, I'll go to Jess, came off mute. Do you have a question?
Yeah, can you hear me okay? I'm driving.
Yes.
Okay. So I love all of the collaborations. One question that we have is, are you still seeing the issue with staff wages? And if so, has there been any way to collaborate in solving that problem within your communities?
I can talk to it from the monastery perspective. That's because this has actually been a big discussion in this transition piece. One of the things that we have come to find out is that Little Blessing salaries were not, which everybody knows, you're not paying your childcare workers a livable wage. And so the monastery said, because they are worried about justice in society, in order for them to take it over, that they are requiring that they're going to be paying livable wages to their workers. And so they built that into their pro forma for their facility. And so I think that's something, and Sister Barb, who is the head of that, continues to kind of beat that into every conversation that she has, is that livable wages are part of this conversation, and making sure providers receive livable wages needs to be that in that discussion. So it's happening in Watertown. I'm not saying it's a solution, but it's happening here.
Tim?
Okay, Kayla, you've heard my discussion on this many times. And I'll switch from livable wage to, you have to be able to retain the workers, right? I mean, if you get somebody that's a good quality person, and especially if they have the qualifications and the training, you have to pay to retain them. If they can go someplace else and make more money for their family, they're going to do it. Plus, you got to be able to sometimes attract them into this. I think a lot of our preschool teachers actually came out of retirement. The wages, attracted them to come out of retirement to do this. And so I just think that's really important. If we've got, some of the numbers we see is 80% turnover. And there's just no way that can be sustainable for childcare. They're going to continue to close. And so in Brookings, how we're doing this is because of the organizations that came together, they've been able to use their resources to make sure that we're paying a wage that will be able to keep the workers. The Boys and Girls Club has an excellent track record on keeping their employees.
Tim, there was a question in the chat. What do you see as assistance for wages coming from the state, or do you see that as something the state will take on?
So I'll go back to what I talked about. I think the initial thing that has to happen is we have to make sure that the childcare assistant pays at the rate of the actual cost of care. I think that's one of the things the state can do. Then I think it's a commitment, and what Sarah talked about, a commitment from the organizations. We started there with our organization saying, we are going to pay those wages. Let's figure out how we can do that. Then sometimes you're gonna end up going to the community, and the scholarship amounts that you're looking for to help some of the families that are in need have to be able to pay the rate that it takes to have the quality teachers. And so I think we all just got to face up to the cost of quality. whether it be at the state level or in our individual organizations.
Perfect. I'm gonna go to William next. William, you came off mute. Do you have a question? It's showing as William. No? Okay, I'm gonna move to Kevin.
I guess this isn't so much of a question. Well, it is a question, but I guess and maybe directed towards Sarah and then all three. Sarah, you mentioned some of the battles that you did in the community, convincing the community of the need. Again, how can our organization and others help you on a statewide level? What are things that you maybe start with what was the resistance that you ran into, and how can we help on a statewide level to address some of those?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I actually just had a conversation with my commissioner, the county commissioners this morning, and we were talking about it. There's a huge part of, well, I shouldn't say huge. It's multi-level. Like, one, if it doesn't affect you, you don't think about it. And so I think that's part of it, is just helping people to recognize that this affects our whole community, and the kids are our future, and putting it in that realm of it. And if we want to talk about how we can address things, other things affecting our community, like prison numbers and those types of things, then we need to be looking at how we're taking care of kids at a young age. So there's some of those pieces that we had to talk about. And then there's the political piece. And I think as some of those comments or the things that we heard were, those are private entity issues, and the community shouldn't be taking care of them as far as the city or the county helping support those issues. Some pushback for things like that. So helping recognize that it's a community, that this is investing dollars, and that just that we hear that all across South Dakota, that those are private entity issues, not government issues. And so some of that recognition. As a side note, it's interesting to me, my cousin, it runs in Watford City, North Dakota, where, they had the oil boom, but she is the head of a childcare facility, and they just opened a new $16 million childcare facility. And she said the only way they made that happen is for the community investment, the city, the county, all of those government investments in that. And so it's a very interesting to me, when it was mentioned earlier, the surrounding states looking at this very differently. I think that's the reality of that investment that they're making and recognizing kids. So as far as like what you can do and what other organizations can do, I think that's it, is we just need to keep reiterating to our community that we all need to care for our kids. Our kids are an investment in our future, and investing in them at this age will prevent costs in the future. One of the other things, and I know Brookings is also a resilient community, I'm also on that resilient communities board. And I think this goes hand in hand with the resilient communities aspect of it. If we really want to reduce trauma in our community, then we need to make sure we're taking care of kids at a young age. So those pieces just need to be talked about over and over. We can't say them enough.
And I'll agree with, oh, sorry, Sarah.
Go ahead.
I'll agree with Sarah about the resilient communities, and that's a program through the Center for the Prevention of Child Maltreatment, which is really looking at the whole child. I think that kind of work being done, and that I think our resilient communities has been around for 4 years or so, and of course they even started before then. That really started the conversation about childcare as a whole, and I think that was very helpful. Brookings has always supported education. Every time that we've had bonding votes, they've always passed easily. And so the community has been very pro-education. So I think our community really gets it. That probably has a lot to do with having SDSU also involved in our community. It's just talked about a lot. As far as what the organizations can continue to do, is what you talked about, Kevin, understanding what's important about early brain development. I think that's one thing. I also like to use the hard fact that, you can use the number of students that read at a third grade level in third grade to tell you how many prison beds you're going to need in the future. I mean, there's a proven formula on how it works. And that's one that I thought was getting out more. And just recently, when I talk to people about that, they're just blown away that, that stat exists. So I think those are the things that all organizations can do to continue to push it, to push early childcare in the communities. At the state level is a lot tougher. I will tell you that.
Hence the reason why we started early learning communities and trying to work from that level. And I would also say, maybe just a point with that is that CPCM and other organizations that we've been working with all are on the same page, and we're looking at coming into the communities like Brookings and so on, and having resilient communities and early learning communities be one and the same. And so, we're trying to get those parts put together on our side.
That would be fantastic. As somebody community that's doing both, would love to see the vision aligned for both of those.
And if any of you are curious what an early learner community is, you can reach out to myself or Kevin to ask further questions about that, or any of the Sarah or Tim, our early learner community, are in early learner communities, as well as Jess and Janessa. So are there any other questions? We have about 10 minutes, little or 9 minutes yet. Any last minute questions for our great panel? I do want to make one quick plug. The joint conference between Early Learner South Dakota and the Economic Development Professionals Association will be occurring in Deadwood this year, next week already, so October 3rd and 4th. On October 3rd, the entire day will be a blend of economic development and early learner childcare focus. So if you're interested in attending that, I would highly recommend that. Early Learner South Dakota, if you're a stakeholder of Early Learner South Dakota and you need a scholarship, there are scholarships available. You just have to email me. I will put my email in the chat, but I would highly recommend attending that if you want to expand on this conversation and you're curious about more about the impacts and what's happening around South Dakota in that regard. Other than that, if there are no additional questions, thank you very much to everyone for participating, and we will have another webinar coming up. I believe actually next month we're going to be covering a Making Your Vote Count toolkit that is available on Early Learner South Dakota. So we'll have one of our partners covering that right in time for election. So with that, I want to thank Sarah, Tim, and Laura again for everything today, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the week.